This is part 2 of Yarning with WyrkerMilloo Murray. Check out part 1 for the beginning of this interview. Through this podcast series, we will provide space to listen to our residents and hear their candid stories and history with Merri-bek. These stories are those of our residents' lived experiences. The views, thoughts and opinions expressed in these episodes are those of the individuals interviewed and do not represent the position of Merri-bek City Council. The Candid Community podcast is made possible thanks to funding from the Department of Families, Fairness and Housing under the Local Partnerships Program supporting multicultural communities throughout coronavirus. This episode of the Candid Community podcast contains sensitive language that may cause distress. Please take care of yourself. Listener discretion is advised. When talking about Aboriginal culture, some people think that they have to travel to the Northern Territory or Central Australia in order to experience it. Would you be able to tell us a bit about the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities who live in and around the area of Merri-bek?
Well, we're just a snapshot, and what you've got to look at is the global picture. And Victoria is made up of 38 First Nations with language and traditions and customs and clans and ancestors and descendants and cultural heritage and all that stuff. And it's very similar to Northern Territory or whatever in that sense. What you don't see tribal people, full bloods, right? In the old days there was 30,000 of us, but that's all changed. The dynamics has changed culturally and biologically. So, but we still retain the elements of who we are as clans and nations, and that's coming through loud and clear in the treaty space and the native title space and the cultural heritage space. That we're going for a reconstruction of who we are because of the impacts of 233 years of colonisation and invasion, and we've never conceded any of our rights. Nobody's ever put it out on paper that, well, we concede this, you beat us in a war. The war's still going, right? It hasn't stopped, and it won't stop until the treaties are done. And in that treaty process, you know, sovereignty is on the table, so there might be joint sovereignty. That means that in America, for example, Indian reservations have joint sovereignty with the federal government. They can do their own taxes on the reservation, they got their own police, they got their own government, etc., etc. Right? So we've got to get to that stage, and that's part of the treaty process. So we are way ahead of any other state, particularly Northern Territory and the rest of it. So, you know, that's where we're at. And I think it's looking good. I think Labor government and the Liberal government both support the process. So our intention is to write up treaties for clans and families and to make sure that the benefits go to that level rather than setting up big multi-corporations like Wiradjeri Council. They run on a budget of about $11 million, but it's all corporatised, and I don't think it's reaching the people. And they're just typical, just one sample of these corporations that are being set up to do cultural heritage and the rest of it. It's fine to make money and, you know, set it up properly. You know, the government's got to be there and the rest of it. But in the end, what we want to see is that the benefits are distributed on an equitable basis across all family groups where the issues are. Social issues, the economic issues, the homelessness, the unemployment, the drugs and alcohol stuff. But it's not getting there. So we've got to rethink how we distribute those benefits. And, you know, we're alive and well. And Victorian Aboriginal people have always taken the lead in the big issues, and we're doing it again. We did it with the referendum back in 67, 68. We did it in the 40s when people walked off Gummagunja and then the Gurindji walked off and so on and so on. So people respect what we do down here, no matter what happened to us. And we're still here.
And would you be able to tell us what it means to be an elder in your community?
Ooh, wow. Elder. Where did that word come from? Anybody know? Well, you know, Cook Oval up the road there, right? We used to play American baseball, and the people who taught us about baseball were Mormon missionaries. They're the guys that walk around in a black suit, white shirt, black tie, they knock on the door about religion, and they were called elders, right? That's where it comes from. And I know this because I played the baseball with the American Mormon missionaries, and we weren't allowed to have coffee, and but they tried to teach us baseball, a bit of gridiron and stuff like that, but it was interesting. But that elder word is a bit of a, I don't know. We never had elders in the old days. We had head men and head women, and depending upon the group, for example, the Wamba group, we have Neriks, head man or head woman. The Kulin groups, which is about 20 nations right through from Dhudhuroa, Wiradjeri, right through to Baraparapa, not Muddy, they have Narrangators, right? They're the head men and head women. And that's the term that we prefer in the treaty space. And it's the same thing with uncle. Where did uncle come from? Come on, you must know that one. You know how people call me uncle? I look at them real funny, eh? And you know why? Uncle comes from Uncle Tom in America. It was a derogative term, like Americans. And if you were toady, bootlicking black American to white Americans, then you were called an Uncle Tom, right? So it's a bit of a negative thing as well. So we've sort of all grown up with uncle and elder and all that, but I think that's got to change.
So would you say it came about during the 1950s?
50s, yeah, probably would have come out of 50s. Yeah. It's a bit like Mumba. You're going to have to change Mumba Park Primary School too. You know what Mumba means, eh?
No, I don't. What does it mean?
Well, my grandfather and a few other senior people used to run a concert in St Kilda Road, and they brought down all these performers from Queensland and around Victoria and that, and Harold Blair, the opera singer, was involved in it, and people would throw boomerangs and play the didge and all that. That was when the first didgeridoo started coming to Victoria. We don't do didges, but it came to Victoria in the 50s and part of this concert stuff, and Uncle Bill owned us. They wanted to know what they were going to call the concert. So they called it Out of the Darkness Came a Mumba, which is a bit of a joke, I think. And then the Moomba mob, city of Melbourne, came and I said, well, can you give us a name for their parade, their festival? Uncle Bill mischievously gave them the name Mumba, which means behind. Right? So, and he told them it meant we're all getting together and having a good time. So I don't know about this Mumba thing either.
I understand you have a very large family. What does family mean to you?
Well, that old bloke I met in Pentridge, Sonny Booth, William Henry Lawrence Booth, that was his name, and he'd say it too, and he was a bit of a gangster type, but he was running a workshop on setting up an elders group at that point, right, at Darabin Arts Centre, and we had about 5 meetings there, and the guy wasn't, he was a street guy, and he wasn't well educated, but he did a lot of jail for different stuff. And he got up at the whiteboard and he wrote down family, F-A-M-I-L-Y. There's about 200 of us in the room. And he says, all right, what does this mean? And everyone just sat there silent. And then he said it. Father and mother, I love you. Get it? So that was it. That's true. So family is important, of course, and it's it basically binds you to look after people and your own family in particular, and there's the discipline that comes with it, and the moral code, the culture stuff, and the first ones is flat when you come into it. So you've got to look after them. You still get your blues and all that sort of stuff. We all got that, but family is really important, and family is the very essence of our spirit and our physical being and our rights. And our families go back probably 120,000 years in this country. Right? The first man-burnt pollen was found at Lake George near Canberra, And when they carbon dated it was 120,000 years old. So when they say 75,000 years, whatever, it's a lot more than that. So our families go that far, probably 4,000 generations in this country. That must give us some rights.
You have a number of connections to First Nation clans and countries. What does country mean to you, and what is your favourite part?
Well, they're all different, from the Alps with Dhudhuroa country to Murray River groups that were involved in, right through to the Loddon, and Young Bullard clan, which is part of Dja Dja Wurrung language nation, at Bort, near Charlton. A couple of special things there. There's a Jara baby that we put in the tree after she spent 99 years in a filing cabinet in a museum. And they did a 9-page study on her. So we took her out of there and we put her back in another tree. Her first tree was cut down. And there's just 29 k's from there is Big Lake Port. There's about 1,000 scarred trees around it, biggest scarred tree place in the world. And we're involved in developing that particular place and protecting it and preserving it. So that's one. That's sort of dry country up to a point. Lake Boga's special. That's Dad's country. That he's buried up there in the cemetery. It's a big lake there, and used to be the old Moravian mission from 1850 to 1856. And the missionaries taught my great-grandfather, Rob Boyd Stewart, how to speak English and write and all that sort of stuff. And he held a mail contract for about 50-plus years around Lake Boga. So he's probably the longest serving public servant in terms of blackfellow, being him. And then we've got Bright, of course, Bright and Wodonga and Upper Murray, as well as Cumragunjas. So they're all special in some way and unique, diverse. And we exert our rights on behalf of our ancestors from that country to all those places. We're not prepared to hand them over to other traditional owners that just come in for the last 10 seconds. Our ancestors got rights here and we're going to protect them. So all country is special, all country is respected.
I understand you studied a Bachelor of Law at Melbourne University and that you are currently applying your knowledge in your fight for land justice. Do you think knowing the Western law is important to succeed in this country?
Well, it is, of course. I use it all the time. I've been involved in lots of litigation to protect our rights, human rights and cultural heritage rights across Victoria. Some pretty big court cases. We're just involved in a couple now. So I've used my knowledge that I gained from... I spent a few years at Melbourne Uni, and I really enjoyed my time there. I loved going to lectures and talking to my professors and all that. I did arts at Monash Uni for a couple of years when I first got married and had a child and that. Then I went to work in public service and all sorts of stuff. And then I ended up going back to do the law course in, I was about 39, I think, 40. I went to Melbourne Uni, got in there, and I really enjoyed it. And 22 subjects out of 24, with only a couple off it. I've got to do it all again. I'll do it.
And going off that, what is an accomplishment you're proud of?
Well, there's only the main one, 12 kids, 28 grandkids. That's all. And that's enough. I don't need nothing else.
What are your thoughts on the renaming of our city council, now known as Merri-bek, the Woi-wurrung word for rocky country?
Well, I was a supporter of changing the name, of course, and I loved the option of Merri-bek was the best one, and I voted for it, I think. And we should do more of it. I'm looking forward to seeing Merri-bek Moreland Station, railway station, change it back to Merri-bek. There's a whole heap of things that can be changed. Names are important, and particularly if they're derogative against any single group, they've got to be got rid of. But there's some beautiful names out there too, language names, and we should be using them. We've got dictionaries now in language across a lot of groups, and you can pick a name out. Rename a bad name, turn it into a good name, and educate people. So totally support the name change. And it just puts, Merri-bek Council is probably the best council in Australia.
And what do you see as a benefit of having Aboriginal languages around the community as place and road names?
Well, we had this issue crop up a lot. There was Mount Niggerhead in Dhudhuroa country, and there was a battle to change that. But we changed it, and it changed to Mount Yatmatang, which is the name of the nation up there. So that was good. And when you do that, you get all the rednecks come out and all the good people come out, and it's a bit of a battle. But without them all knowing, they're educating each other. They're having debate, having dialogue, and that's good.
And how did you first get involved with advocating for human rights?
Oh, that's a good question. My father, he very learned man. He grew up in Lake Boga and Baraparapa, and he was a bit of a bush boy, so he didn't go to school much. In fact, they stopped him from going to primary school in Baraparapa because of racism there. Wouldn't let him in. So he ended up coming to Melbourne and joined the army, and he spent 6 years in the army, World War II. 3 years overseas in Borneo and New Guinea, and he was the first one to go out and point, which meant that you get out in front of the battalion in the jungles, and you get shot first if you're unlucky. He was also the first one to put his hand up, pick all the bodies up that were out in the heat, in the jungles and on the beaches, and they'd be cut in half from Gatling guns and bullets and whatnot, and they'd pick up the bodies and give them a decent burial, whether they were Japanese or whether they were Australian soldiers. So he did that right through the war. So when he came back, the racism was still around. He couldn't get a job, didn't get a soldier settlement, but he got involved with grandfather Pastor Sir Doug Nichols, and he mentored him into the politics stuff. And Dad actually ended up setting up the Victorian Aboriginal Funeral Service based on his past experiences, and his philosophy was respect the dead and respect the living. If you don't respect the dead, you don't respect the living, it's all bad. So he lived by that principle, and the funeral service was set up, it's still running, and we've got all sorts of plans for how we implement a proper funeral service with proper burials and our own cemeteries across the state and the rest of it. We need to fix them up. But to answer your question in the long way, Dad was so political and he was so bitter about what happened to him that he take us kids to Communist Party high tea in Kew. That was when we were in primary school. So same time he was sending us to Sunday school, we were going to these Communist Party events, and so, they were pretty boring, except for the Leamington cakes. I always remember the Leamington cakes and the cordial. So that was our first part of our politicalisation, going to those meetings. And then from there, of course, we played sport, so we're right into the Glenroy Broadmeadows community stuff, Broadmeadows Footy Club and Glenroy Cricket Club and all that sort of stuff. So, and playing sport's political, right? Because you're educating people about who we are, and you're getting closer to people and having relationships and all that. So that was all good. But from about 15, it was my father as well as my grandfather, Pastor Sir Doug. I started work over at the Aboriginal Advancement League, the old one in Northcote, and I was the cleaner. So I started at the bottom. But I'd get in the car with old grandfather Nichols, and we'd take a heap of rubbish down to the tip, or we'd go on a field trip, and he'd educate me about how stuff was working, and same as my father. And so that was the start of my political education from that point. So I probably started when I was 15. I'm now 71, so I've been doing this stuff for a long time. The politics is still out there. Dynamics have changed a bit, but it's still about human rights. It's still about making sure that, everybody's loved, they're not homeless, they've got jobs, they've got education, they bring their families up proper and the rest of it. It's always been what grounds us. We can talk about all the fancy politics, but at the end of the day, it's about poverty, and subculture of poverty is all the negative stuff that happens with unemployment and homelessness and drug abuse and the rest of it. So my political education has been forever, and I hand that down to my kids and my grandkids. And my kids are involved politically. My oldest is 50 and youngest is in his 20s. They've all got good jobs in political arenas. One child, 2 kids are working at First People's Assembly. That's supposed to be the Black Parliament. Nathan obviously played football for Essendon for 10 years, so he's a professional footballer. But now he's out there, he's retired, and he's out there doing stuff in education and promoting traditional games amongst schools and whatnot. So he's got a full agenda most of the time. He's living in Brighton. So all the kids are going well, they've got good jobs, and that's all a man should be happy for. I'm a millionaire in one sense, but I'm on a pension in another.
Would you be able to tell us about the late Margaret Gardner? I understand you had a close personal and working relationship with her. Can you tell us about some things that you both accomplished together?
Well, I knew Marg for about 20 odd years, and we're partners for probably most of that. So Marg did the first welcome at the Code School, which is the old Glenroy High School site. That was 95 or 96. So she was there from the start. And even right up to her death in August, we were talking about it and how we needed to get it moving and get it built. So I would hope we'd name it after her in some fashion, as well as keep the name Blertmurrup, because Blertmurrup means strong spirit. And that was Marg as well. She was a very strong spirit. She was very, very firm about her beliefs. And, Marg was involved in a lot of groups and committees, and like me, she's multi-clan. Wurrung was just one of her nations. She was also involved in the Waveroo litigation. She was one of the applicants, and in fact, when we took the Tangerang group to court, the case against him was named after Marg. We call it the Gardner case. So that was a Supreme Court case as well as a federal court case. We won in the federal court, so the Gardner case is really famous in terms of native title. And the Supreme Court, we settled out of court. It's still ongoing with research and stuff that come out of it. And then Marg was involved in Yorta Yorta and Baraparapa, Wamba and Dja Dja Wurrung. So definitely she was multi-clan, and she was a politician from the day virtually she was born. She was born in Birchip in Wamba country, and lived in Charlton, and moved to Melbourne, and she was very special.
Would you be able to tell us a bit more about the Blertmurrup site and why it's significant?
Yeah, well, it's when we moved to Glenroy in the 1950s, they were just building the school, Glenroy High School, and then we ended up going there in the 60s, to Glenroy High. There were about 1,000 students from all over the place, and had about 3 sets of classrooms, so there's Block A, Block B, Block C, the usual high school type thing. A lot of sport. It was very focused academically as well as with sport. And that school lasted till it ran out of numbers, I think. And they shuffled things around. And then they set it up as an Aboriginal school in about 95, 96. And it became what they call a code school. Code school, Koori Open Door Education School, which is the weirdest name. But that's what BAI, the education group, demanded as part of the Northland secondary college issue that Gary Foley fought with the students out there at Northland. So the trade-off was Jeff Kennett was going to sink Northlands, and then they set these code schools up in Morwell, Glenroy, Swan Hill and Mildura. So Glenroy High became the Glenroy Code, and then over a couple of years they changed the name to Blertmurrup, Strong Spirit. But in the end, all the code schools got killed off because they weren't maintaining their numbers and their success rates weren't that good. So Glenroy Code, Blertmurrup Code got shut down in 2010, and that's when we had the protest to save the 13-acre site, because we thought that they would sell it off for housing subdivisions like they did with Oak Park High and all the other ones around here. And this was Jeff Kennett's time, and after that Labor government. So we had a campaign, and we sat in and protested and media stuff, and in the end the state said, well, we're not going to sell it off. And then they bushwhacked us with the Glenroy Specialist School. They gave them 6 acres of the 13 acres, or 7 acres, and that was good because, we weren't going to have a battle with kids with disabilities. So that one got through to keep her, and we got left with the 6 acres. 6 acres, we had architects look at it and what we could do with it, and it come down to a multi-purpose cultural education precinct with a sports academy attached, wetlands area, maybe residential type part with cabins for bringing kids into an urban camp situation with cultural stuff. And that's basically the concept. And it's still there. But 10 years later, we haven't turned over 1 inch of soil. I don't think it's council's fault. I think it lies with our own mob. There's all sorts of internal politics going on that we need to address this year and next year, and we're doing that. We want the thing built, just like they built this and the Oak Park swimming pool. That's got to get built too. We need a physical presence here and a precinct facility where we can go to for medical service. Like if I want to go and see a doctor, I'll go to Fitzroy Health Service or Preston or Epping. Too far for me. I don't drive. Public transport would take 2.5 hours to get to Fitzroy from my place. So, there's a lot of people there. 2,000-3,000 people between Hume and Merri-bek. So, where's our services? They're all over that side of town. So we want to change that, and we need a medical service here. And a medical service at that site would probably be opened up to everybody, not just our people. You need the numbers going through there to make it viable and all that sort of stuff. So we see it as a community facility, not just an Aboriginal one. At the moment I think it's at risk. Right? So we're putting the war paint on. You'll be hearing about it. There's going to be a public campaign on it. We've got to put the pressure on the Wurundjeri Council to fire up. So we'll do it in some way. We're still working that out with Wurundjeri people. There needs to be reform.
Thank you again, Gary, for coming in and sharing your candid story today. You're a remarkable person in our community, and we're very lucky to have gotten to share in your history with Merri-bek and all that you're achieving in the treaty space for Victoria. Thank you.
Very good. I love it. I'll come back anytime.
We can't wait to have you back on the show. Thanks again for listening to the Candid Community podcast. Please check out the episode description for links to many of the causes spoken about in today's episode. If any of the topics discussed has caused distress, please reach out to the number of support networks listed in each of our episode descriptions. Take care, and until next time, keep it candid.